Hello again, and we're going to continue our discussion of CSS. And we're working our way into some CSS animation, right? So, in our last video, we kind of talked about how to construct this box using before and after, right? So I have an example here. This is kind of an example page that I made, and I just tried to invent a bunch of different animations. So you can see I've got just a box that kind of rotates and turns when you hover it. And this one kind of turns into a circle. That one is kind of like a window shade, right? So there's a few of these, right? Each one of these is a little bit different, right? So this looks like the switch on your iPhone. This one is kind of a little broken, but I did it for a reason here. I'm going to zoom in on this right here, right? And when we look at this one, you can see there's really three parts, right? So there's this gray lozenge or pill shape that's in the background, and then in the foreground there's the checkbox and this green and white circle right there, right? So what's happening here is we have this button that works and there's no JavaScript on it, right? And what it's working on is the state of the checkbox. So this is the checkbox, but what we really want is we really want it to look like one of these, right? But but we have this checkbox to deal with, right? So what we do is we hide the checkbox, and when you click on the label, if the label is associated with the checkbox, then it makes the checkbox check or uncheck. So you can see when I click on this part, this is actually the label. So when I click on the label, it activates the checkbox, right? And if I was to hide the checkbox, then the label would still activate the checkbox, and our CSS could look at the state of the checkbox to get it to do what we need it to do, right? Or to display itself, in relation to the status of the check mark, right? So I'm going to open up the inspector here, and you can see that I've got a label, and then inside the label there's an input, and this input is the checkbox. So it's input type checkbox, and then there's a div here that is the circle, right? And there's another div. I forget why I put that other div there. Maybe I don't even need that, but essentially I need one element to draw this circle, and then the label itself is that gray lozenge shape, right? Or the pill shape with the rounded corners, kind of a rectangle with rounded edges, right? So when we click on this label, the element gets a focus property, right? Or selected property, and that we can check and we can style based on that, okay? So, when I look at this guy right here, you can see when it's input : I said selected, but I guess it's checked, right? And then we're going to look at the div that's inside there, and we're going to give it this color green. If it's not, we're going to give it the white color, right? And then we get this, right? Okay. So, and then if I go to this checkbox right here and I remove that display none, you can see the checkbox is missing, and our switch looks like this, right? Okay, so we're going to go there. Like, that's where we want to go, right? But before we go there, let's do a few more things, right? So what we want to do before we go there is we want to figure out like why these things work the way that they do, like how to get the animation to work, okay? So how can we get these animations working here, right? And then once we get the animation working, then we can kind of tie it in with the state of the checkbox to make something useful, right? And actually I say useful for that, but the animation itself is useful, right? So there's nothing wrong with doing an animation like this. This would be great if you use this in certain places, right? You could use that somewhere, right? So all this stuff is useful, but we can put it all together into a system and we can get this checkbox happening, okay? So let's give that a try, right? So currently I have this example here, and I've got this before element, right, which is a small 80 by 10 red. I'm going to just switch this back to black, right? Okay, and then that's one of the lines here, and then the other line is this one, right, with the after. So I have the before and the after, so I have two lines there, right? Okay, So in CSS, there's two ways to animate something, right? So we can animate something with transition, and we can also animate it with animation. Okay, so we can use transition or we can use animation. So transition is kind of like a quick temporary animation, right? So and it's kind of like a one thing. Like if you just got one small thing you're going to do, transition is a great tool. Animation, on the other hand, is for more complex animations. So you can do more detailed animations with multiple steps along the path of animation. Okay. Um, let's start with a transition. Okay. So what I'm going to do is let's just start with the background color of this box. Okay, so I've got the box right here, and to add an animation to the box, I might say box colon hover. Yeah, you hover like this without a space, right? So I'll do box colon hover because the space would be the descendant selector, right? So we don't put the space in there, right? So we're going to say box colon hover, and what you're going to do is you're just going to change the properties, right? So you can change any of these properties. So I don't have any background color. What if I put, background color, and I made the background color, let's do it as white, right? So now it's filled with white, doesn't look any different. But if I go over here and I say background color of, let's do red, right? So it'll be easy. Now when I put the cursor over the box, the color changes to red, right? But what I'd like to do is I'd like to, animation is built over time, right? So what I'd like to do is I'd like the animation to change, or the color to change over a specified time. So if I make that change happen across time, then I get the animation, right? So I'm going to add a new property to box, okay? I'm going to say transition. And the value here, you can put a few values on there. I'm just going to put in the value that's the time. So I'm going to say let's do it even longer. Let's do 1,000 milliseconds. And again, time, like anything else, has a unit, right? So there's several different units we can use for time, right? So I set up transition of 1,000 milliseconds, and now when I hover, you can see that the red fades in and it fades out, or the color changes from white to red and then it changes back to white, right? So it's only going to change to red when the value changes here because of the hover, right? So what is going on? Well, we have the transition property, and I've set the transition to 1,000 milliseconds. So there's 1,000 milliseconds in 1 second. If you want, you can use 1s, and that will be 1 second. So that's the equivalent of 1,000 milliseconds. What's nice about the milliseconds is we could say, like, if we want something to be half a second long, we could do 500. Or if we wanted a little longer than half a second, we could do 600, or a little shorter, we could do 400, right? So the milliseconds make a good number for short animations, right? If you have a long animation, you could use seconds, right? So let's flip that back to 1,000, right? So with the transition property, any changes to any of these properties is going to take this time. Okay, so whenever those properties change, this is how long they change. So it doesn't matter what the property is, right? So if I added here, if I said, border radius, right? And I said like 20 pixels, right? So the change in border radius would take 20 or 1,000 milliseconds to change by 20 pixels. Okay, so you can see the corner there, right? Okay. So you can change any property here. Let's do border color. I don't know, right? Border color is, I don't know, I need a good color here. Let's do orange. I don't know, right? So now the border changes to orange, right? We can do border weight, border width is 10 pixels. This is going to make it move. So sometimes, we don't want to do some things, right? Like that looks kind of weird, right? So I really don't want the box to move. It's kind of cool and it could be good, but I really don't want this to shift like underneath someone's cursor, right? That makes like kind of a weird user experience, right? If it could sit still, maybe it's okay if the border changes, right? And you could make that happen too. If we made the border up here 10 pixels, then the weight would change over here, right? You could make an invisible border, right? So you can make the border invisible, but it's 10 pixels, and then that would keep this in the same spot, right? So there's a few techniques you want to use, but here's what we're going to introduce here, right? Concept is anytime a property changes, if you want that change to happen over time, you can set the transition property, and that will say how long changes take. Okay, so that, and for us, the easy way to apply that is through a hover, but you could also apply it through through other means. So if you change the property with JavaScript, this would still animate that change. Okay, if you change the property through some other system, that would, if anytime CSS sees the property change or any of the properties of this element, it's going to take this long for that change to occur. Okay, so that's an introduction to transition. And my challenge to you is take a look at this page. This is linked to the class document. So look this up, and then try and recreate some of the animations here. So use transition and see if you can figure out how these are made. Okay, this one I did the checkbox here. I did this one with JavaScript, and I did this one without the JavaScript, right? So these look the same, but they're a little bit different. This one just works on a hover, right? So that maybe not as useful. It's kind of nice when it has the click, right? But anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope that that's maybe a good introduction to transition.